When it comes to long-running series, often developers take one of two paths. They either hunker down and watch their series slowly decay due to lack of innovation, or they decide to try something different, knowing that change always brings backlash. The Tales of series knows this all too well. With Tales of Phantasia debuting back in 1995 to the latest in the series, Tales of Arise, released back in 2021, change has been a part of the series from the very beginning. Tales of Arise, however, is a peculiar case in this timeline, as just like Symphonia back in the day, it too serves as a pivot point in a new era of the series. Its reception at that time was also seen as favorable, with media websites such as IGN stating how it had an excellent story, cast, and combat system that was needed to recapture the series' best moments. A Destructoid review states, "Impressive efforts with a few noticeable problems holding them back. Won't astound everyone, but is worth your time and cash." GameSpot's input on the game was lengthy and beautiful, but has messy combat and uneven pacing on occasion. It has been nearly 3 years since the release of Tales of Arise, and with it being the most recent and accessible to the masses, I find it to be a game worthy of discussion now that the dust has settled. This is not to doubt the words of prominent media companies, but more so a personal exploration to see how their values align with mine. So, with that being said, I want you to join me as I share my thoughts about this game to answer the most important question of all. Was Tales of Arise good? To properly answer that question, I will be assessing the gameplay, the story, the voice acting, and its replayability. So, let's dive right in. To those of you unfamiliar with the Tales series, the battle system in each game is different minus the basics. Some games, such as Symphonia, lock certain arts to a character's proficiency with either strike or tech. Graces, on the other hand, have arts bound to certain titles a character must have equipped in order to learn them. Xillia, however, has its arts and skills unlocked via the Lilium Orbs. This web of stats and skills reminiscent of Final Fantasy X is quite similar to what Arise has. Arise operates on the title system for each character, with a few arts and skills tied to each one. This is a simpler version of what the Lilium Orb system was, which by all means works. It still satisfies that itch for progression in my caveman's brain without keeping me locked into a menu for a third of the game. Once said art or skill is obtained, it is now time to put them into action via combat. Speaking of which, Arise follows in the footsteps of its predecessors, which got rid of random encounters, but it takes it a step further by also getting rid of the victory screen. This makes battles feel almost seamless with the world around the player, as the rewards are calculated while the player is traversing the field. But enough about the basics surrounding the combat. Let's talk about the combat in general. After contacting the enemy, the game then transitions over to a fairly sized field surrounded by an invisible barrier. The combat in Arise is fast and fluid, as Alvin, for example, can string together regular combos either on the ground or in the air, in addition to the arts he has learned via titles. Since arts are now tied to the refillable art gauge, Arise also takes things a step further by binding healing moves to its new profound cure points or CP mechanic. This forces the player to camp or rest quite often to restore these precious points, especially at the start. For the beginning duration of the game, the player can use up to 6 different arts alongside boost strikes, but as time goes on, the access to arts grow to a whopping 12. Boost strikes, by the way, are flashy team attacks that can deal high damage to instantly take out normal enemies or damage bosses to a fair degree. This also, combined with Alphen's ability to sacrifice his HP to perform devastating blazing sword moves, adds yet another layer of fun to keep combat refreshing. While this may sound overwhelming at first, the game does a great job of easing the player into each mechanic over time. I will say that combat-wise, this game has the strongest start in any series. However, with that strong start comes a lot of oversight. Everything I've described thus far flows together seamlessly when done in regular battles throughout the game. When you take this setup and put it into the boss realm, however, oh man, this is where things take a turn for the worst. Arise's fluid combat system turns into an all-out stalemate due to excessive amounts of HP each boss has, combined with hard-to-see telegraphs and their high resistance to stagger. Your normal attacks become useless as they turn into chip damage. This oversight became apparent by the first boss fight for me, in which Balsef, who I want to call Ballsack, strolls into the battle with a whopping 19,010 HP versus my level 9 Iron Mask and Xion. Just to put that into perspective, the first boss fight in Berseria against Ceres only had around 2,200 HP. This dirt nasty amount of HP with bosses in particular becomes a common trend in Arise, coupled with limited items and CP in the early game makes some of these battles brutal. Now you can cheese some of these boss fights by spamming Alphen's blazing sword moves, but it is a bit sad that it has to come to that with such a fun battle system. In a way, I understand the limitations to up the ante when facing against a boss. A player may be down to their very last item to beat said boss. This in a way brings some sort of satisfaction once the boss has gone down, but the way Arise tries to emulate that is done in the worst possible manner. Even some of the mini bosses in this game suffer from a massive HP pool that brings nothing of value to combat. Never, in any game, especially Tales, have I managed to pull off a 244 hit combo on a mini boss at the extremely high level of 16. Something like that should not be done if your game is properly balanced. In the later part of the game, this issue with boss sponges is not as prominent as it was in the beginning due to a wider moveset. However, it never truly goes away. Do not get me wrong, Arise is one of the greatest battle systems in the series as it streamlines the bad and highlights the good. It just dropped the ball when it came to boss fights in particular. Moving on to the story, I have decided to split it into two parts for easier digestion. The first arc of the game, which revolves around the 5 lords, is your classic good guys take out bad guys type deal. As the game is just starting, you will encounter new friends and foes as things progress. Arise does a great job of invoking this sense of mystery around a few of the lords by adding in little twists here and there. The player does not experience just growth in game mechanics, but also the overall plot, which is interweaved with facing off against the lords. While the first half of the game is by no means perfect, its build-up is sufficient for making everything that has been done up until that point worthwhile. Now the second half of this game is where all of that time and effort just gets flushed down the toilet like a big piece of shit. Without going into spoilers here, it is just awful. The story becomes convoluted, not because of its characters, but instead its execution. By execution, I mean beating a dead horse into the other side of the planet. At first I thought, hey, okay, this is the beginning of another arc, let me be patient, I am sure that this is all for a good cause. Turns out, I straight up lied to myself, because the plot ran itself straight into the ground without hesitation. I consider myself fairly patient, and as a JRPG consumer, I also enjoy sitting back and watching what is an anime with some gameplay in between. But this one segment in Arise was one of the worst experiences I have ever had in a JRPG. Near the end of the game, for whatever reason, it was decided to turn the game into a full-on movie, but the plot is about beating a dead horse once again into oblivion. For nearly 2 hours, which I will show you a screenshot of right now, consisted of walking and talking. No gameplay, no real engagement, nothing other than walking to the next cutscene and talking to someone here while you run over there and do the same thing. Who, in their right mind, thought this was okay? You have had an entire game to prepare, bake, and serve this plot, yet still failed to do so in a meaningful way. And to make matters worse, the game continues its downward spiral to the very end. The ending is rushed and most of all contradictory to what I felt was the meaning of the game all along, which was no sacrifice, no victory. I didn't play 40 hours of this game to see still frames of my party members and what happened to them afterwards. 40 hours was my clear time, by the way, with a good portion of the side quests finished. I wanted to see cutscenes showing that my sacrifices did indeed result in victory. Show me the areas that I previously traveled through now change for the better. Show me the party members with some semblance of life in them and not some photos. Now, I understand this game came out during the pandemic, but it just left a bad taste in my mouth after finishing it with how bare bones the ending felt in terms of effort when 2 hours of production was spent a few hours before that on mindless babble that could have taken all of 20 minutes to explain and flesh out. Of course, some would say that's just not enough time, but I would argue that we have had the entire game to work up until that point. Overall, the story of Arise is one filled with potential, but that's just it. Sometimes less is more, and in this case, it would have been more beneficial to have gone that route. With that out of the way, let's also talk about the voice acting in this game, and most importantly, the characters that are given these voices. The main cast features voice actors from all walks of life and at various stages in their careers. Ray Chase, for example, who voices Alphen, has had roles in animes ranging from Charlotte to Jujutsu Kaisen as of recently. Erica Lindbeck, who voices Shion, has a plethora of voice acting roles, with one of the biggest being Black Cat in Spider-Man 2. With these two being the main characters, it is important to have actors that can carry a strong delivery to the very end.
What the hell were you thinking?
Well, you were trying to protect me too, you know.
Yeah, but I have the sword. It's different.
It's not different. Besides, Never mind. It's nothing. Anyway, thank you.
But this is also where things fell off for me. The 4 other party members in this game are quite frankly bad. I'm not referring to their voice actors, but their writing in general. They each carry that distinct Tails look, which usually hits different tropes, and even their banter back and forth in battle is incredible. Yet when it came to the story and their overall interactions with each other, they all felt bland. I never felt a sense of connection to the other 4 members, mainly due to Alphen and Shion always hogging the spotlight. It oftentimes just felt like the other members were just there. They all felt cut and paste with no real meaning behind them. This was not apparent in the beginning, but by the end, I realized that those 4 characters could have been anybody, and the overall story of the game wouldn't shift in its impact once the credits roll. This is quite a shame, as one of the things that makes a Tails game is the personality of each party member. Yet Arise felt like it was only built around 2. The good news is that the voice acting in this game is still good, but its poor writing prevents it from being great. Lastly, let's talk about the overall replayability of this game. Once the game has been beaten, around 4 more side quests get unlocked alongside the prior ones which may have not been completed. Do not forget about the arena, elite monster hunts, fishing, finding owls, and artifacts. I did find what the game offered in the post to be adequate. While it could have been better, it could have also been worse. I will say that after experiencing the ending of the game, it did take the wind out of my sails for the extra content. Normally after I beat a Tails game, I feel invigorated and want to play more of it. But in the case of Arise, I felt the opposite way, though I arguably spent the least amount of time in this game compared to the other main Tails titles. Casting personal feelings aside though, this game at its core has replayability. While the second half of the game leaves much to be desired, the first half in terms of both the story and combat is just a good time. This is a game I can see myself picking up again in a few years just to run through it again, especially knowing what segments of the game are worth skipping. This is a testament to how good Arise is when it does things right. Overall, Tales of Arise, while not perfect, does make great strides into bringing the Tales series into the future. The combat is snappy and fluid when it works. With cooking and the victory screen streamlined, battles are more addicting than ever as the game gets right to the point. Let's not forget about the title system with skills each character can learn. When it comes to the story, Arise is sufficient in that department for the first half of the game, but the second half leaves much to be desired. The same can be said about the main cast of characters. Outside of Alphen and Shion, the rest of the crew, while aesthetically pleasing, especially Kisara, feel more like background characters with cool outfits than actual main characters. Speaking of aesthetics, Arise is a gorgeous looking game. The choice in art style this time around really brings a unique edge the series has needed for quite a while. Whether you are a newcomer to the series or a veteran, Arise does bring some good into the Tales universe along with some bad. But with that being said, let me answer the most important question of all. Was Tales of Arise good? Yes, Tales of Arise is good, though it could have been great. I will say that I do concur with its overall reception at the time of its release, minus a few caveats as well. Now, this is surprising to me as many media outlets nowadays focus on the quantity of reviews rather than the quality. But I have said enough here. Tales of Arise, please take it away.
And that's all there is to it.